Hello and welcome to this presentation on UK bank accounts, specifically when one is required and which one to choose if indeed you do need to set up a UK bank account. So this is aimed at businesses entering the UK market, specifically Irish businesses, as this is an Enterprise Ireland presentation after all. My name is Ben Aspinall. I'm from Ecovis Wingrave Yeats, a firm of accountants, auditors, tax advisors based in London. We're part of Ecovis International, which is a network of like-minded firms around the world in about 90 countries. And we've been working with Enterprise Ireland for somewhere north of 5 years, maybe nearer 10 in fact, basically helping their clients enter the UK market as efficiently as possible and making sure they're equipped with everything they need to know before making the leap across the Irish Sea into the UK. So one of the most painful points when it comes to setting up in the UK can often be the UK bank account setup, and that's largely down to the fact there's a lot of regulation around that. There's a lot of due diligence required. There's also a lot of choice. There's a lot of confusion out there because there are banks, there are things that look like banks, there are challenger banks, there are cash accounts and FX accounts. So there's a lot to consider. So this presentation is aimed at giving you some of that information so that you can make an informed decision as and when it's time for you to enter the UK market. So today we're going to look at specifically when you do and don't need a bank account. So it might be that you can continue to operate without the requirement for a UK account. We'll look at the various considerations before making that selection of on which bank account to go with, what documentation you'll need to have in place, the different providers there are. We can't cover everything, and we definitely don't endorse any banks. We're not affiliated with any. We get no kickbacks. We cannot and do not promote any of these accounts that we'll talk about today. They're just the accounts that we happen to see our clients using, so we have some knowledge of them, or at least are aware of them and what their requirements are. We'll talk about eligibility, and we'll also talk about the sort of next steps if you are looking to set up an account, where you might start, and the things to tick off before you jump in. So first up, it's very simple. There is no legal requirement to have a UK bank account for a UK business. There are a couple of things where you may or definitely will want a UK account in place. So the number one reason for needing an account is the direct debit for a pension provider in the UK will need to be with a UK account. Now, there are some providers out there who, for a fee, will provide that service, where essentially they have a client account for you and they have the direct debit in their name. We don't work with any directly, but they do exist. For the most part, they will see clients setting up bank accounts for exactly this reason, to ensure they have a direct debit in place for UK pension providers. Also receiving cash from HMRC, so they will issue a cheque to you most of the time if you don't have a UK account, to save yourself the hassle of that, or if perhaps you bank with someone who doesn't accept cheques, then you'll want to have a UK account to receive any refunds of VAT, for example, that sort of thing. And also then just for building your UK credit. So you might want to have a history of UK banking in order to one day access lending in the market without having to go through the hassle of international guarantees and sharing maybe the parent company information with those lenders. And then, so I've already said that there's no legal requirement to have a UK bank account, but just to reiterate that, there's no requirement to have it for all your day-to-day operations, paying anything to HMRC. As long as it's in GBP, as long as it hits their account and is the balance they're expecting, it's not a problem. You can pay it from anywhere. And of course, no reason that you shouldn't pay any staff from an overseas account. So there's no requirement in the day-to-day to have a UK account. Obviously, operationally, it's probably more useful. It's helpful to have an account that separates the UK business activity from anything else in the group, including the Irish parent. That just makes your life simpler in terms of admin and bookkeeping. Otherwise, you have to separate out all the UK transactions. You have to maintain the intercompany account, which will have a lot more going through it than if there's simply just one or two transfers of lending between the two entities. So when it comes to the key considerations, there's no difference really in the UK to anywhere else, and probably very similar to in Ireland. You're looking at what you might require in terms of currency management, FX management, um, the different types of currency accounts. So some banks will offer you just a GBP account, some will offer you multiple different currency accounts. So it really comes down to what your business needs operationally. Then we'll look at the cost. So I guess the fees charged per transaction or per transfer between currencies, and also just the maybe the cost of if you've got expense accounts and cards and things. That what are the transaction costs there? Interest, of course, if you're going to have any reasonable sum in the account, then you want to look at what interest might be coming back to you. Security, so this is not just sort of in-app or in website security, in-site security. It's also just the security of your funds. So is there FSCS, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme protection, in place for that particular institution? So I'll come a little bit onto that later on, but essentially the FSCS protects some of your cash, whereas some banks will not have that protection in place. They'll have other things, they'll have safeguarding in place, but it's not necessarily as secure. So integrations, this is really about the how to what extent you need your bank account to integrate with, say, your accounting software or maybe your point of sale system. So have a think about that, whether that's integral to the operating of your business or whether actually it's just a nice to have. Obviously, most accounting systems will allow for uploads from Excel. You don't necessarily have to have a live link, although it does make life easier. And then just eligibility, I suppose. If you can't access an account, there's no point pursuing it. So it's just good to know. Okay, well, what are the thresholds? What are the hurdles I need to get over for each particular account, and therefore, which ones are relevant to me? The documentation is pretty simple and will probably be fairly familiar to anyone who's opened an account before. It's from the business perspective, it's proof the business exists and is trading. So incorporation certificates, group structure, shareholder details, and then if it's pre-trading, you won't necessarily need all of this, but you'll need to prove some level of turnover and prove that the business is in fact operating in the UK already. So for some banks, particularly the high street banks, your HSBCs, Barclays, etc., they will probably have much higher thresholds. So they're going to want to see proven turnover. They want to see maybe signed contracts to the tune of 6 figures or maybe even 7 figures. Evidence that there will be significant amounts going through the accounts. Otherwise, they're really probably not that interested, unless perhaps they already have a relationship with you. And then probably of more importance to a lot of new entrants to the market is the director details. So just the ID of the directors, proof of address, passport, driver's license, etc. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, but essentially the information about director and business will be really all you need to collate before applying for any bank account. So these are the providers we're talking about. So there's challenger accounts in here, challenger banks in here, and traditional sort of high street banks. So you're looking at HSBC, Lloyds, NatWest, Santander, Barclays on here as the sort of the typical kind of high street banks. So they have much higher barriers to entry. Realistically, if you don't already have a relationship with them in Ireland, or if you don't, they don't have some sort of subsidiary banking arrangement with your bank in Ireland. You're unlikely to be able to get an account with them unless you happen to be able to prove, as we discussed on the previous slide, significant amounts of future revenue or signed contracts, for example, or if you're happy to put down a very, very sizable deposit into those accounts. So there are exceptions to that. Some of these banks, say HSBC, for example, they'll have an online only account, which is a little bit like a challenger account in the way it operates. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but it does have it's a fairly simple account. They do have certain requirements around where directors are based. So, for example, they might not entertain any business without a director based in the UK. Whereas these challenger banks, you're talking about Monzo, Revolut, Moneys, etc., they will typically be fine with you not having a UK director. They're generally speaking, if it's within the EU, then you're okay. You have a director based, resident in the EU, you're probably all right opening an account with any of those challenger banks. Outside of the EU, it can become a bit more challenging. There are challengers out there that will provide those accounts. They tend to be not true banks, if you like. They're more like currency accounts, but they still operate direct debit facilities and things. So you can get around it if you don't have an EU-based director. But in an ideal world, to give yourself the best chance of getting some sort of fairly established challenger, then you'd want an EU-based director. So a director based in Ireland is not an issue. They don't have to be resident in the UK to open the account and get yourself a GBP account with UK IBAN. So in terms of eligibility, there's obviously a few things to consider. One is I'll just skip ahead a little bit to that third one on the top row there, to resident director. So really, first thing I'd be checking is what are the requirements in terms of where does the director need to be based? Because if you're not planning to send someone to UK or hire a UK director, then what are your options? You could use a director services, so direct, employ a third party essentially to provide that directorship. So professional directors, or you might want an operational director plugged into your business. You want to recruit someone, but if you're not going to do that, then your options will be limited. You either need to hire someone, so a third party to provide that service as a director who's happy to sign on the bank mandate, or you're looking at banks that don't that will offer you a director based overseas, an account for a director based overseas. So that's going to limit your options a little bit, but it's not by no means the end of the world. As we discussed on that previous slide, the challenger banks will typically be happy with non-UK resident directors, provided they're within the EU. So there's going to be checks on UBOs, so just make sure you're clear that the accounts that you're looking at don't have any restrictions on this is ultimate beneficial owners of the business who are based maybe in high risk jurisdictions. Most of the clients we see from Enterprise Ireland don't have that. They're usually Irish owned. But obviously there are some exceptions where perhaps the ultimate owner is actually not based in Ireland and maybe is in a higher risk jurisdiction. And similar to that, the business activity. So is it a high risk business activity? Certain industries, arms manufacturing, gambling, that sort of thing, there may be certain restrictions from those banks. So there'll be within every sort of challenger bank and every bank's website, there'll be a list of T's and C's that includes a list of the eligible businesses that they will work with, and those that are not eligible to apply for accounts with their bank. So minimum turnover, this is pretty much exclusively for the high street banks. If you're looking for a high street bank, they will expect you to prove that level of minimum turnover. They may have a threshold of anything from 3, 4, 5, 600,000 upwards to maybe 7 figures. And that's really just a barrier to entry because they're not going to make a lot of money off you if you're not putting a lot through the business. And similarly, a cash deposit, it might be that if your minimum turnover is a little bit below the threshold, if you're prepared to put down a large deposit in the account, being a sizable 6-figure deposit, then again, the bank may entertain setting up an account for you. Existing relationship, this is probably quite a useful one. I think if you've maybe got a personal banking relationship or an existing business relationship would be even better with a bank account, then that's the place we typically say to start. So I would say if you're entering the UK market and you're banking with HSBC already in Ireland, then do speak with your account manager in Ireland and ask them to help you set up in the UK. Very often that's the best way to get a high street bank if that's what you're looking for. If you're not so worried about high street banks, then it's less of an issue, and the challenger banks and the FX accounts will typically afford you an account without any kind of prior relationship. So just to reiterate, with the high street banks, it's either a case of you already know them, they already know you, and they trust you, and they can help you with their sort of subsidiary banking in the UK, or they need significant amounts of proof, lots of evidence that you're going to have a genuine business here that's turning over maybe as much as 7 figures in year one, and perhaps is putting down a sizable six-figure deposit. So that very often what we'll see with Enterprise Ireland clients is probably you're looking at a challenger bank to start with, because maybe the relationship doesn't exist. You're working with an Irish bank that doesn't have subsidiary accounting in the UK, or access to any other high street banks in the UK. So we'll see someone use a Revolut, or a Starling, or a Monzo, or a Wise, for example. And then maybe after a year, 2 years, 3 years, once there's some trading flowing through the business and there's a bit of history, if they're looking for an account with a bit more to it, a bit more substance, maybe an overdraft facility, or some invoice financing facility that's attached to that bank and not through a separate financial institution, that's when they might look to move banks. So it's about building up that kind of credit history, as we discussed at the beginning, that kind of history of trading, and then that's when they might look to move from the challenger to the high street bank. In terms of how you might go about setting up in the first place, so the next steps, speak with the Irish bank, as we just discussed. I think it's really important that that's covered off early doors, because it can save you a lot of hassle if they can just introduce you and get you set up from the off. And then look at your needs. What are your requirements in the UK? Do you need just a standard bank account, just able to deposit a bit of cash in from the parent company to get the company going? And then do you need something that integrates with your POS system? Do you need something that integrates with your accounting system? Do you need different currency accounts? Some bank accounts will give you lots and lots of different currencies, as we discussed earlier, and some will just give you one GBP account. So you need to understand what currencies you need, and in order to narrow down the focus on which bank account to use. And then start to collect the documentation. So all of the certificates of incorporation, the director IDs, the group structures, the proof of residence for any significant shareholders, the UBOs, ultimate beneficial owners, and that will start to get the ball rolling there. And then apply as early as possible, because the time frame for setting up a bank account can be quite lengthy depending on who it's with. So some of those challengers will pride themselves on telling you that they can open an account for you in hours or a couple of days, and often it will take a little bit longer because they're doing due diligence checks, and it may take a week or 2 or 3. It can be very speedy, but if there's any stumbling block, you'll often go back to the bottom of the pile whilst you get checked, and that can take a couple of months. With the high street banks, it's even longer. It can be anything from sort of 2-3 months upwards to 6 months. I have even seen it nearer a year. So getting started as early as possible. And obviously that is also why we see a lot of people start with these challenger banks and these FX currency accounts, because although they don't all offer the same level of protection, some of them will have that FSCS protection we discussed about, some will not, but they'll have other safeguarding in place. They do allow you to get up and running really quickly. So the best thing to do with anyone without that FSCS protection, or with sufficient safeguarding in place, is to put as little as possible in terms of cash into that account, and to sweep it out on a regular basis, so that you're not holding too much cash there, just in case the very worst happens. It doesn't happen often, but it's not unheard of that a bank will fail. So just be careful with those types of accounts, but then use them for a year, 2 years, until you've got that credit history built up, and then you can start to move towards maybe a high street bank, or one of the larger, more established challengers who perhaps have all that FSCS protection in place. So yeah, apply as early as possible, and get the ball rolling, because it can really hold up everything else. If you're trying to employ people and you do the direct debit on the pension, it can hold all that up. If you're looking to receive money back on some early VAT returns, perhaps if you've got some VAT refundable and you haven't got an account in place, you're going to have to get a check sent somewhere. More likely than not, you'll get a check, and then you've got to find a way to cash that. And these days, often people don't have the capacity to cash checks, particularly if you're using then a challenger bank. So yeah, quite a bit to consider. We're happy to have a chat with you. So if you want, my contact details are on the next slide. If you want to get in touch or get in touch with your Enterprise Ireland account manager, and they will put you in touch with me or one of my colleagues, and we'll talk you through all the different options. There's lots to consider, more than I've gone through today, but hopefully that's given a broad overview of what we're talking about, what we should be looking at when you're setting up a bank account in the UK for the first time. Consultation, a free chat, half an hour is absolutely free. There's no charge, so please do get in touch, pick our brains on the bank account setup, and we're happy to point you in the right direction. As I say, there's no affiliation with any banks. We get nothing for it. Just some goodwill with our partners, Enterprise Ireland. So we don't we don't get anything for that from the bank. So you're not going to be pushed down an avenue that's not suitable for you. We'll just give you as much information as we can on what might be most appropriate and what are the options. What's your eligibility? What are the options for you? So to recap, you're looking at the challenger banks or the FX accounts, usually as a first point of call, and then into the high street banks a little bit further down the line, unless you already have that relationship, or are looking to make a big statement with significant signed contracts from day one and in the UK and a sizable cash deposit. So please do get in touch. Thank you for listening, and take care. Thanks.